Welcome everyone. Good morning. Hope you had a great night. Love York. What a great place to hang out. So for today we're going to begin with a reflection and check-in from Luea, and then we'll go into our panel. So I'd like to hand it over to you, Luea.
Good morning, everyone. I have the great honor to welcome us collectively into the day, and for that I invite you to stand up. And as we stand up, maybe we can just see how is my body this morning. I was very inspired seeing the sun tickling my face this morning after yesterday being more cloudy. And if you want, you can close your eyes or soften your gaze and do a little check-in with yourself of where is my center this morning, right here, right now? Is it maybe below my feet, in my belly area, chest, or in my crown, in my head? Or maybe even somewhere floating above or at the side. And just for a moment, a short moment, greet your core or your center, wherever it is. And then imagine as if there is a little ball of light. It may have also a little color in it. Or maybe several colors. And then if you have this little ball of light, just imagine how it is traveling in your body, in your system, and possibly also beyond your physical skin. And just as if it is tickling you awake, as if it kind of spreads the color or the light that is in it through all the different parts of what you consider being your body, being you, being your system. Just a little tickling shower, flowing, rushing, bubbling through your being. And then as a last move, maybe you want to also extend that here into this space, into the room that is hosting us, into the building that is hosting us for these days, to the land that is hosting us, holding space for our explorations and then our encounters together. And then as one last offering, just see what is your contribution you want to nurture today for us as a whole group. What do you bring? What color, what tone do you want to bring into your day, into our day here together? Just as a small little intention or a wish or a dedication. And then you can take one last breath together and slowly open and come back to the space. May it be a beautiful day for all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Luea. That was beautiful. I can feel that tickling energy. So we have a panel now on the IPBES Transformative Change Assessment, or the TCA. And this is the cozy part of the conference, so we all get to slow down and share conversation. So if you haven't heard of the TCA before, well, it's part of the IPBES Global Biodiversity system. And the IPBES is kind of like the IPCC, except the focus is on biodiversity and ecosystems. And the Transformative Change Assessment, or the TCA, is a big effort to address a really big question, which is what kind of systemic change is needed to halt biodiversity loss and restore the resilience of biodiverse systems? Big question. And even more importantly, how does that change actually happen? So 2 really big questions. And of course, these questions don't just apply to biodiversity. If we're working in food or climate or health, whatever the topic we have, navigating complexity, power, burnout, and structures in order to achieve big goals and support transformation in systems that not only aren't designed to support it, but might actually resist it, that's a common challenge that we face in many of our projects and our work. So this is what this session is really about. It's the human side of the process of putting together the TCA. So today we're going to hear from 3 people who are at the heart of this process. So Karen, Hannah, and Julia are going to reflect on what this experience stirred up in them, what it demanded from them, this multi-year commitment and what it revealed. And they're going to talk about the tensions and internal shifts that were associated with making transformation real inside a bureaucratic governmental structure. So as you listen, think about how this resonates with your own work and consider what it suggests that we as a community need more of as individuals and as a collective to sustain transformational practice. So I want to introduce our 3 panelists. So Karen O'Brien is a professor at the University of Oslo, and she's the founding co-lead of the TCA, the Transformative Change Assessment, and is well known, and I'm sure you do, familiar with her work on climate change, systems transformation, and the power of interchange. And Hannah Gosnell, over there at the end, is a professor at Oregon State University, and Hannah brings deep experience in land use, rural livelihoods, and relational approaches to environmental change. And she was the lead author of Chapter 5, which looked at strategies for enabling and scaling transformative change. And finally, Julia Leventon is with Czech Globe in Prague, where we held our last conference. She was our conference host, and she's head of the Human Dimensions of Global Change program there. So her work focuses on systems governance and equity, and she led TCA's work on values, learning, and agency. This was Chapter 1, which explored how human systems shape the causes and responses of global change. So we're going to begin with Karen providing an overview and framing of the assessment, so you get a sense of what this was all about, its origins, goal, and evolution. Over to you, Karen.
Great, thanks. It's really nice to be here at a Transformations conference talking about the Transformative Change Assessment. And we kind of consider this as our unplugged version. So I'm going to give an overview of the process and a little bit so you get an idea of what's in the assessment, but it's not like just to talk about the findings, but it's to set it up for our dialogue here. And the Transformative Change Assessment is really considered a foundational assessment of the knowledge of transformative change for a just and sustainable world. And I think it's a game changer because it's really the first of its kind within IPBES it's a very conceptual assessment. It's a very daring move asked for by the governments to go like, what is this concept of transformative change? It comes out of the 2019 Global Assessment, which really was marching orders for transformative change. So it brings together a broad range of evidence. It's a really unique endeavor that we're looking, how do we reach the 2050 vision for biodiversity? And the process itself, as many of you are aware, it's like about a 3-year process. We had 101 experts from 42 countries, regionally balanced from around the world, or at least that's the goal of IPBES. We had a very strong gender balance. And in this assessment, more than many others, there was a high degree of interdisciplinary scientists, including social scientists, so it was very exciting. We drew on about 7,000 references in the assessment, and analyzed about 880 visions, and we also had about 400 case studies of what's happening on the ground. And perhaps most important for these science policy interfaces is that we also had to address 10,000 review comments. So every step, and I'll go through that timeline because that really was, it's a science policy process and everything. So it's a collaborative process. It brings together people from different contexts and we really had a strong commitment. So I was one of the co-chairs with Arun Agrawal and Lucas Garibaldi, and we had 15 coordinating lead authors, of which Julia and Hannah are two. And Yves Singebe is also here. He was a coordinating lead author. So it was really a team effort among all of us that we really had to figure out how to work together, not just in chapters, but across chapters. We had to draw on the scoping document, which was prepared from 2020 to 2021 during COVID. And this document also went through a very strict government review process, and it gave us the name, the chapters, and these are the objectives, this is what we're going to do. So in some ways it was constraining. It gave us, it's like, why is it in this order, not that order, etc. And as Bruce had said, we're assessing how transformative change occurs, what are the obstacles that can impede it, how do we get options that are aligned with shared visions of a sustainable world, and then which factors in society can be leveraged to bring about transformative change, and in line with the direct and indirect drivers that were identified in the global assessment, and then how does this influence societal values and behavior. So the list was really long, and we also had maybe 14 policy relevant questions that governments said okay, we want to know how, what are transformative changes, how can we do them deliberately and emergently, and how do different groups envision a sustainable world, etc. So we had a long list of our marching orders when we went into it. And the 5 chapters, these are the list of them. So it really is kind of the framing of the chapter, of the assessment in chapter 1, the visions in chapter 2, the how-to, which is a lot of what we're working on with the different frameworks, the different understandings, and then the challenges, the barriers, and actions, strategies and actions. And one of the things we decided very early on is that each chapter would be short. If some of you have read IPCC reports of 150-page chapters and things, we really were 8,500 words. And everyone was oh, how do we do that? So we wanted it to be where people could read 5 chapters and create a very clear narrative. This was our timeline. You can see that we had 2 external review processes for, so it looks like one long timeline there, but that's what it feels like. But you can see in there that they don't put little things like vacation, time out, recover, take care of yourself. It was just boom, And I think that's where we had just a little arrow, you are here, and that just kind of moved on. And it really was, in some ways, a relentless process to get it, because we had to get to the IPBES 11 plenary in Namibia in December 2024. And so working backwards from that, there was very little leeway for timelines, things. And so this is the summary for policymakers that was approved in Namibia. You can see the long title of the underlying causes of biodiversity loss and the determinants of transformative change and options for achieving the 2050 vision for biodiversity. That's my 10 minutes, it's a long title. But what we did is structured it into 3 sections where transformative change is urgent, necessary, and challenging, but possible, and that's really important. Then we focused on the strategies and actions for transformative change, and then how do we enable it, and what are the roles for everybody. And I put this one here, this is that we're weaving together diverse approaches and knowledge systems, including indigenous and local knowledge, recognizing that enhances strategies and actions for transformative change. So it's not about just saying okay, we need structural approaches, we need systems approaches. It's we need them all. And you can see here that inner transformations, empowerment, science, technology, knowledge co-creation are also part of that. So it's really important. And I want to emphasize that indigenous and local knowledge being brought into the science policy process is one of the features of IPBES, and it's really important. And from the very start with the glossary, we emphasize that English language, subject, object, nature, humans, it doesn't capture it in the way that many other languages. And we're in the International Decade for Indigenous Languages, so we really wanted to be inclusive in trying to recognize that there are different ways of doing this, and it brought into chapter 5 that this is almost, language is so important in moving from relations of domination in towards an ethics of care. So that, I think, is one of the unique features that we'll be talking about. And the starting point really was that it is urgent, and transformative change is urgent and necessary to address the interconnected crises related to biodiversity loss, nature's decline, and the projected collapse of species, recognizing climate change, pollution, inequality, and all the poly crisis. And we used indigenous art. And we really emphasize that, as by definition, deliberate transformative change for a just and sustainable world shifts views, structures, and practices in ways that address the underlying causes of biodiversity loss and nature's decline. And this is very different from some of the earlier presentations because, transformative change can go this way or that way. And right now in the world we are seeing transformative change, but it's not towards a just and sustainable world. So how do we actually do that? Okay, 3 minutes through, speed up. But the ones that we emphasize are, from the literature, are disconnection from and domination over nature and people, prioritization of short-term and individual and material gains, and the concentration of power and wealth. And these, you can almost feel like, are being exacerbated and strengthened right now in the world, these kind of the underlying causes of biodiversity loss. How do we break them? And there we identified principles for transformative change that include equity and justice, pluralism and inclusion, respectful and reciprocal human nature relationships, and adaptive learning and action. So how do we then get to where these are informing the views, structures, and practices that were taking place? We recognize that there are challenges to doing this, challenges and barriers, and don't have time to go through them, but in the assessment we talked about colonial modernity, capitalism. We got pushback from reviewers like that. This is jargon, this is, we can't talk about this, but we kept the ideas of this, that, relations of domination over nature and people that emerged from colonial eras, economic and political inequalities that come from certain types of economic systems, etc. And we identified 5 strategies and their actions that have synergistic effects that include transforming economic systems, include transforming governance systems, but also talk about shifting societal views and values and conserving and regenerating places of care, etc. So each of these strategies has a number of actions, and that was another, okay, 1 minute. And we emphasize small-scale and large-scale changes can contribute to change, that it's an all-of-society, whole-of-government approach, that every single person has a role to play in transformative change, that we need these shared visions, and that they actually can help us to recognize that, that we're moving in the same direction, including visions that recognize agency of non-human life forms and an ethics of care. And to end, we didn't want this assessment just to be something that sits on a shelf in somebody's office or in a drawer. We want it to be put into action. We want it to generate conversations. And we included a practical user guidance, so every people, projects, initiatives, and policies can actually go through, logically and think through, okay, am I being inclusive here? What are the principles? What are the underlying causes we're addressing? And how are we getting this? And in the, we can talk about the process, how it went through, but I have to say that the governments were very enthusiastic about this at the end, but getting there on that timeline was another story, and that's the story we're going to tell now. So. Leave that up there.
Wow, it's hard to capture so many people, so many elements of our community over so much time in such a complex endeavor. We actually did a webinar about a month ago, and we invited the lead authors, and Karen and David Aburo, who's the director of IPBES, will also be at our Johannesburg conference in August, to provide a more detailed statement and a summary of all the components. So we'll be sharing that video with you. We trimmed it down, it's only about half an hour. It's intense. Each of the chapter authors gives a summary of each chapter, so if you're interested in the content of the assessment, we're going to send that around and you can review that at your own leisure. This conversation, though, is going to be about the personal dimensions of this. What were the tensions and challenges associated with being a part of this complex international effort that involves so many governmental representatives? So I'm going to tee up a question and hand it over to our panelists to address. And the first question is, what personal dilemmas emerged for you during the assessment process, and how did you navigate them? Over to you, Julie.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to have two parts of my answer to this, and I'm actually going to start with the very personal, because my family is actually at the back right now of this room, and husband's hiding his face. The biggest personal challenge for me in this was how I honoured my priorities in life. So for those of you who don't know, IPBES is done on top of your normal workload. It is a voluntary thing. So I had my day job. Sorry, you don't hear me. Okay. IPBES is done on top of your day job. So I had my normal job, run a research department, running research projects, then IPBES on top of that with travel commitments, that timeline that's intense. You can't miss deadlines. You've got to hit them. You've got to coordinate your chapter group, be writing, responding to comments. So all of that going on. And at home, I had sort of my biggest priority of my family up there. And quite often it was them that was missing out. They're the ones that are losing the time from me. And when I was with them, I was so strung out of dealing with all these processes and conflicts in the process or problems that we were dealing with that they did not get the best of me for the last 3 years. So sorry. That's not the first time I've said that, and probably won't be the last. And I think that sort of juggling priorities and not always honouring your own internal priorities also applies to the process itself. So I am quite committed to the idea that we should listen to everyone in the group, that knowledge should emerge from the bottom up, that we should allow space for these plural processes. But when you're running against that timeline that Karen showed you, sometimes you were not able to sort of give that the space and the priority that you would like to give it. How about you, Hannah?
Oh, okay. Well, thanks so much for setting this up. It's been a wonderful opportunity just to reflect on what we went through over the 3 years, because I think when we were in the trenches, we didn't really have that opportunity. And so for me, I would say I came into this with a strong background in my research on the inner dimensions of transformation, really interested in the personal sphere of transformation, so I knew I wanted to make sure that was in Chapter 5. And Strategy 5, I organized Strategy 5 around shifting societal views and values to recognize and support the fundamental interdependence of humans and nature. And we were able, as coordinating lead authors, we were able to bring in contributing authors. So in addition to the 20 amazing lead authors that we were assigned from all over the world, we were able to pick experts in the field. And so I was excited to bring in some of the most provocative, cutting-edge thinkers in, how do you address these underlying causes of disconnection from nature and domination and what, in a nutshell, my personal dilemma was trying to navigate these exciting ideas coming in with kind of resistance and pushback, not only from the external reviewers, but from within the chapter, some of the other authors. And I'm just going to give just a quick example of a couple of issues. And, you heard about these 10,000 reviewer comments, and these are the things we had to navigate. So this really exciting cosmologist who wanted to talk about a new paradigm based on scientific breakthroughs is revealing a radically expanded perception of the world, and convergent with universal wisdom practice teachings is realizing the unitive nature of reality. It's vital that educational structures and teachings are reimagined and transformed in alignment with this unitive worldview and narrative and the experience and embodiment of the universal values and ethical principles they naturally invite and nurture. So there's this idea about including stuff on a unitive consciousness narrative got pushback. And so one of the lead authors says, this seems too obscure to me. The idea of universal values and unitive worldview seems problematic in light of our emphasis on different knowledge practices and cultures. So, this perception that talking about unity would somehow discount the idea of diversity. So that was something we had to navigate. And then one other example was we wanted to include diverse sources of knowledge. And so there was just a little bit on intuitive interspecies communication. Literally one sentence ended up in there. Recent research includes arguments for the use of intuitive interspecies communication to facilitate inclusion of more than human knowledge in decision making. So I had an expert who wanted to put that sentence in. A government reviewer says, the inclusion of such an intangible idea undermines the other ideas around it in the chapter. And so the personal dilemma was having to navigate that tension between, I want to put in these really exciting ideas that are a little bit edgy, and then the kind of status quo being like, oh, I don't know about that. So anyway, that would be and so it sort of made me feel more committed to expanding the norms of what's legitimate in academia and science. So yeah.
I think those tensions and the conflicts, they went all the way through. And as co-chair, I don't think I knew what I was getting myself into. As first, like, we will not use the word deadlines, we will use due dates. And everyone's like, there's a deadline. And so, how do we, navigate that? But I had to kind of meet myself because I'm very conflict averse. Naturally, I'm like, I wanted to be a diplomat. I don't like that. And I also have this, the fear of not being good enough. And both of those came full force because there were conflicts within every branch of the technical support unit, with the secretariat, with the, among ourselves as the co-chairs, with this, there were just, which is normal, part of a transformative process. But I was very sensitive, so just dealing with that really made me, I had to really realize that it's not the end of the world when people are just shouting at each other and fighting and throwing things. It's like, okay, that's part of it. And we were doing it with a sister assessment, the Nexus assessment, which was looking at the relationships between biodiversity, land, water, health, and climate change. And we were like the, they were like the ones that had all the data and we're so good, and we were like the flunkies. They're along that timeline, they're like, this is not good quality, what are you doing? And it was really I had to face the not good enough in a really real way, that this is and our country focal point in Norway was really, because she said, Karen, this was never going to be an easy assessment. This is very conceptual. And the first review comments were like, this is a lot of jargon. What do you mean by principles? What do you mean by politics, power? This is, and I think it was really that we were speaking different languages. Even within the assessment, we had ecologists, we had political scientists, we had people with so many different views and entry points. And it was really, as that process continued, we really started to converge and see a lot more. And as I mentioned, after being almost whipped for a couple years in terms of feedback from the reviewers and from the multidisciplinary expert panel and the secretariat, at the end, during the plenary process, countries were like, why don't you talk about capitalism directly? What about colonial modernity? And they were really supportive of bringing in, we're going to use Mother Earth and things. So we felt, and countries are really eager to use this. So I had to learn to stand up for, be aware of conflicts and get rid of my not good enough and say, we're doing good. So that was my learnings.
Thanks, Karen. Wow. Yeah, I hear all this, these tensions, these negotiations that you have to hold, the balance between consensus and allowing for conflict as a generative force. It's a lot to manage. So our next question over to you, Hannah, is how did this experience, all these tensions, being in this pressure cooker, shift your worldview or reinforce commitments that you already had?
Yeah, I don't know about shifting my worldview, but reinforcing. I know I came into the assessment sort of intuiting and having a hunch that Indigenous peoples were going to need to play a really important role in transformative change around the world related to biodiversity loss. And but throughout the 3 years, I thought that understanding of the critical role that Indigenous peoples must play in transforming our world, not only by their actions or activism, but just by their examples of being, was just so exciting to bring in experts and have these indigenous knowledge panels and reports to refer to. And so I was able to really prioritize that in strategy. In chapter 5, strategy 1 is all about recognizing that we don't need transformative change everywhere. There's actually a lot of really great examples of people interacting with nature in ways that are protecting and restoring and conserving and biodiversity and flourishing. And and when we got to the plenary in Namibia, it was really fun to be around countries like Bolivia, and every other sentence, Bolivia was and adding Mother Earth. They wanted to keep getting more references to Mother Earth. And but then you could see the pushback. The United States would say, well, add in a clause as understood by some. They just the United States is just not comfortable with having Mother Earth included in the report. So that tension between I just gained a greater appreciation for the incredible knowledge, and Karen showed that chart that we ended up having in chapter 5 with all these different indigenous concepts about human nature interconnectedness, and I'm really excited to dig into that more and learn more, because the English language is so limiting, and when you look at these concepts in other languages, it really can expand your mind about what's possible.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think the expanding the mind is really a part of the whole process where we start to see, I was part of the Indigenous and local knowledge workshops and working groups and things, and realizing just like how much we know, how much there is of, like that it's not, it's just really about listening and really being able to include and not integrate, or IPCC kind of like puts it in a box or something, but to really take it in that this is really important. And for me, it was I think my worldview also, it was influenced by recognizing that talking to the delegates from different countries, like they have their personal views and then they have their professional views. So the person from the United States, and even within our author group, there are people who are doing interspecies communications. There are people who are these like amazing yoga teachers, and like we all have these dimensions to us, but when we connect who we are with what we're doing. So when you talk to the Brazilian delegate, he's like, well, I really have sympathy for, he and his comments were excellent in this, but then the government was watching him from Brasilia, and he had to be, run that course. And I think that the human dimensions really became realizing that we have so much potential for transformative change, but we have identities also. We get in our own way.
Yeah, and I think sort of building on that, it shifted my understanding of what we mean when we talk about plurality and how we honour plurality in a process like this. So I think I came into this process kind of thinking, oh yeah, we've got all these nice interdisciplinary thinkers, all these different disciplines, we're going to put them together. Let's use a systems thinking framework to put everybody together. And I'm quite embarrassed about that now. So I don't know why I just told you all, but sort of 3 or 4 years later, I'm now seeing that we can't do that. We can't just subordinate some knowledge to someone else's framework. We had to give it much more commitment to hearing, understanding, figuring out the messy bits, and realizing that, it's about the knowledge we bring, it's about the values we bring, it's about the priorities we've got, the other things we've got going on in the world, how we're bringing those together, and how we negotiate is not the right word, but sort of find our path through all these different ways of knowing. And how we do that in a linear process like that with deadlines, I don't know. I think we actually did a very good job within the constraints that we had and pushing at those boundaries. But it really did require everybody in that process to open themselves up to different ways of understanding and different ways of being in the world.
Yeah, really making those concepts that we embrace tangible in your own work. I hear you. Next question over to you, Karen, which is, what do you feel is the most significant but underappreciated dimension or lesson of the TCA?
I think one of the key messages, the one that I think was really important, is that often in transformations we make this distinction, that's just an incremental change, this is transformative. And we really emphasize that incremental changes can be transformative if they're addressing the underlying causes of biodiversity loss. So we're, in every increment, we're moving in this direction or that direction, and that they can actually add up, they can be very powerful. And I think that helps policymakers to realize that just changing one subsidy can open up for other people to change other subsidies. One, that we can make that difference in the matter of, et cetera, et cetera. And I also think from our analysis of the case studies, I just showed it very quickly, but for like 271 of them, positive social and ecological impacts were seen in less than 10 years. So when they take down the fences in the Masai Mara area, like wildlife comes back, and it's not impossible for transformative change, and that really is that idea that it is very, it's challenging, but it is possible, and that our small changes can make big changes. So that, I think, needs to come out in the narrative of this whole community.
It is possible.
Yeah, and I think to make it possible, I would stress that this is a framework for action. I think that's the thing I would like everybody to understand about this assessment. It's a framework for action. Yes, we did some deep conceptual work, and we really engaged with a lot so many concepts in this assessment. But it's not conceptualizing for the sake of conceptualizing, for coming up with a new definition. We did that work because it was really important that we don't allow space for transformations washing, for anybody to come along and make change and say, yes, this is transformative change. It can't be everything, particularly when we see these sort of undesirable shifts in the world happening at the moment. So we needed to provide a concept that provided boundaries or handrails, but in doing so we also provided something that helps everybody stretch what they're doing about all these initiatives and actions, whether they're small or large, whatever scale or level they're working on, that we can see, okay, I'm maybe working with views and practices, but I'm not yet working with structures. Okay, I need to expand into that. That's my stretch zone. I need to extend what I'm doing here. And okay, I'm working with 3 of the principles, but the 4th one I could strengthen. So yes, it's a conceptual framework, but it's a framework that should guide our actions and encourage us and give us ways to stretch the work that we're currently doing.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I really feel like I've felt that stretching because of this assessment. I think the most important, what was the question? The most underappreciated
significant message.
Yeah, the idea that if you're not addressing the underlying causes, which include disconnection from and domination over nature, you're probably not being truly transformative. And then chapter 5 saying that we really need to shift from relations of domination to relations of care. Those standards, those kind of guidelines, those have really got me thinking about my own research. Anybody who was in my session the other day, and I'm really rethinking how I talk about regenerative agriculture. I've always thought of it as like truly transformative, and it's really got me thinking, well, to what extent are we really addressing the underlying causes, and to what extent are we really seeing relations of care in our animal agriculture operations? And so it's just it's forcing me to ask different kinds of questions, which I think is really great. I was going to say something else.
Yeah, Hannah, I want to follow up with bringing it back home here for our community. So what would be one insight or question or reflection that you would want this community to carry forward that came out of your experience with the TCA?
I think that we need to keep working on expanding the norms within science and academia about what's considered legitimate knowledge. I think out there's a whole exciting world of knowledge and understanding that goes beyond just the material and the tangible. And that's just an exciting frontier for me to look at.
Yeah, sounds like it. Karen, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that just from the plenary review process, governments are open to transformations. They're hungry and they want to know, what do we do next? And that every time, I think I've presented this 25 times over the last months, and everyone just says, and now, help us, what can we do? How can we do this? And that's where I think this community can play such an enormous role, because you have examples, and people want the examples. What does this look like in practice in my area and everything? And I've heard so much at this conference. So I think sharing that and really, recognizing that this is the moment where people have opened up to transformative change at a time when, I think the crisis has gotten hard, critical enough that maybe people are even opening their minds to other types of knowledge, ways of knowing.
Julie?
Yeah, and I would say, given that we're at this moment where people are opening up their minds, push the boundaries. Find those boundaries and push against them in every possible way, and push against the boundaries of processes that are given to you, and push against the boundaries that we self-impose in the way that we interact with each other, or the way in which we negotiate with each other, and really try and expand the spaces we have for meaningful collaboration and seizing those moments. And alongside that, I would say, recognize your own boundaries in this. This is hard, and allow yourself to prioritize your actual priorities in life as well, and give your time to your family when you need to. So push, but also respect and
Yeah.
hold firm when you need to.
Yeah. Maintain that balance. So before we close, we wanted to get a feeling of how this is landing for you. You know, do you feel some of these tensions that came up in this process in your own work? So I want to throw out a few of these tensions that we've heard about today and see how these land with you, see which feels alive for you. So the first one is this tension around different ways of knowing: scientific, indigenous, technical, experimental, experiential. How many of you are grappling with this kind of tension in your own work? Yeah, many. Thanks. Second one is care. Care for self, care for family, and productivity. Getting shit done, you know? Trying to be slow and be relational, but also deliver and perform on deadline.
Due dates.
Due dates.
You're supposed to get that.
Due dates. Yeah, how many of you are feeling this kind of tension in your work right now? Oh, yeah, it's almost universal. Yeah. And the last one is navigating this relationship between power and participation, trying to keep and make space for voice and agency in systems that don't always allow it and might actually have obstacles to expressing those kind of voices. How many of you are feeling that in your work? This looks pretty commonplace. So we have just a few minutes left, but I wanted to invite, if someone has something coming up for them, sharing that they'd like to share, some kind of just a brief word or phrase or brief reflection, very brief, 30 seconds or so, I wanted to invite any of you to bring that out. And if you need a mic, Louise's got one, or Johan's got one. But let's see if we can have as many as we can in 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really cool. It seems to me, like you say, you've created a framework for action, and I have an answer. I want you to keep going and evaluate answers. And 30 years ago, I had an epiphany about how our system can't work and how to transform it. And I've got a handout, been passing around to individuals, but I don't know where the door is to give you this, what I call a wholution. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Jim. Someone else who'd like to take the mic? Over here.
Thank you for jogging over. I'm really interested in how you would like to see a statewide or municipal leader, network leader, start to implement the practical user guidance. What would that look like optimally? I know it's going to be unique from place to place, but if you could provide a few guidelines about how a practitioner can start to use the practical user guidance at a state or municipal level, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, and I just kind of want to turn it back over to you, Karen, because I think a guideline, some sort of user's manual is sort of on the way, isn't it?
Yeah, Eve is up there, right? Is up, yeah. We're working on that because this was a real first step to try to link it to the summary for policymakers, but to elaborate on that so that people can use. There's a lot of lists of barriers and actions and things, but how can you take it and put it in a context specific? How does the municipality start with the chat? And we kind of outline it here. What is the project? What are the goals of the project? What are the values of the project? What's the vision? Has everyone been included? So it has this more like a game of iterative processes, and we're going to be experimenting with this in the Transformations Conference in South Africa also with people from municipalities and things to start that. How do you engage? And people have contacted and said, can we get the cards? We did it at the launch in Norway and with different people from municipalities, from the city. And what it really does is it generates conversations about what's missing, what we need to include. And I think that's what we really want. So our job in writing the assessment was done, but now the job begins for the whole community to start to engage with it. And as you said, we have these solutions, we have pollution, you know, like there's so many frameworks that are out there, are very much aligned with new structures and practices and the principles and the, you know, we know this, and I think it gives an opportunity to share and say, like, listen, we've been talking about this for a long time, and then, you know, Indigenous people say, we have been, you know, this is, we actually have a lot of the pollutions, the solutions, and the things, and we have a lot of questions too. And those questions then, you know, like just to ask different questions, as Hannah was saying, is critical at this time, especially since when we started the assessment to when we finished, the politics of the world have changed dramatically, and maybe that was also very visible in the plenary where people were much more open to transformative change because they anticipated what we're in right now.
Yeah. Yves, I know you're engaged in this production of this user's guide. Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think, thanks. I think it's like, I'm really proud of what we achieved and how we got all those elements together, but I think we all agree that this is only part of the process and that there's a lot to do, like for example in linking the different elements and making a story out of it and contextualizing it, and that's exactly what we want to do with this guideline, that it's not like a one-fits-all recipe, but rather a process. And this, I think, this concept of adaptive learning came really out of this conference, like everywhere.
Great.
And so in a complex world, we just use these elements to kind of trigger identified elements that we can use, and then actually give the agency to the people that are in the process to take them up and define a pathway for action. And I guess that's supporting this process is what at least motivated me for engaging in this whole shebang for 3 years. And
Any sense of timeline when we can expect to see it?
End of the year.
End of the year. We'll hold you to it.
First version.
Is that a deadline?
No, it's a due date.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. We'd love to continue this conversation, and we have an opportunity to, in a sense. Later today, we're going to turn toward the future and explore how the transformations community can support these kinds of efforts that we care about, and the people, us, who are doing that work. So hold that tension, you know, if you recognize it from this conversation today, something that hits close to home. And think about how this can be something the community can support, and how we can, as a community, sustain one another in this work. So thanks everyone, and let's give a round of appreciation to our panelists.